may have opened the floodgates with my protagonist talk in one of my previous videos. I really need to be more careful because it could easily turn into this rampage, me going on about all kinds of protagonists that I really dislike instead of focusing on those that I enjoy, that I would aspire to create myself. And even though I think that I was kind of able to stay within the lines that I've put for myself, I was definitely towing them a few times when I was forming my arguments for and against certain types of protagonists. And I'm fully aware that I'm making things way more difficult for myself than they need to be with my silly rules, but I also need to be more conscious of them. Since I've already established them, it would be ridiculous to not adhere to them, at least as far as I am able to. And since I did realize that I was slightly more negative than I would have liked, I am definitely going to focus my attention more, at least as far as I'm able to, because I think it's an important talk for me. It's an important topic that I do want to mention at least briefly in some of these videos, because protagonists are for me a huge part of the story. If the story has a singular protagonist, it should be a protagonist of some sort of form that I can enjoy without it basically ripping me out of the story because of some of the actions or decisions that the protagonist makes just grind my nerves so hard that I can't even focus on the other components of the story because the protagonist just does not allow me to enjoy the story properly. And with that, I wanted to continue the protagonist talk a little bit more before Asterix. It's been about a decade, probably more, since I started creating some scenarios. It usually takes me a while to fall asleep, and that turned into this sort of a time ideal opportunity for me to start thinking of a story. Most of them were quite bad, very wish fulfillmenty, and most of the time a full-on self-insert stories based on whatever media I consumed either that day or at any point of my life prior to that occasion. And some of them maybe had bits and pieces that actually had some worth, but mostly it was just bad, childish fanfics. I never really wrote down anything, so they just played out in my head. One would usually last anywhere from days to a few weeks if I found that particular idea more interesting than the others. But then a few months ago, I actually went ahead and started finally writing a story down. That one wasn't a product of these press rip musings, but I just opened a program and started writing from the pretty much top of my head, whatever came to my mind first, and only started thinking about it more as the story progressed. And when I was doing that, I realized what kind of a protagonist I truly wanted to create. Not a literal self insert with the exact same decisions and responses that I, from this real world, would do and make if I was in that other world, but a different kind of a protagonist, someone that I would genuinely like to self insert as, and I don't know if this makes sense to anyone else, since it barely makes sense to me. The difference between those two types might be minuscule to non existent, but I figured that reading a story about me in a different universe would be something that I really would not enjoy and straight up dislike. So instead of that, I want to create a protagonist of a different world that is a fully fledged character with his own personality, his own decisions. I have mentioned resistance against the story and against me as the author. And I would like to create this kind of a character that I would want to become if I happened to be able to project myself into that setting. A summary of this whole rambling would be that instead of inserting myself into a different setting, I would like to create this setting, create the characters that make this story alive, that allow me to bring some breath into this world that I would like to create, and then create a protagonist that I would like to actually become, that would carry me through this story as a character on its own, that would create the story, that would push the story forward, that would make the decisions that the character would make, not that I would make as a human in our current world. I don't honestly know if that's even possible, if I'm capable of distancing myself so far from that character and yet still create a character that I would just genuinely like. It does sound more and more ridiculous the more I think about it, and yet it also sounds more like something I would love to be able to achieve. So I'm going to continue writing. I am taking notes of certain characteristics that irk me. On the other hand, some that I really admire in a character, and also certain world settings that I find pleasant and unpleasant as I am writing this first attempt. And even though I am mostly focusing on the protagonist that I would like to create, I am also fully aware that a good protagonist needs a balanced cast of side characters that bring things to life, because if it's just the protagonist, I think it's doable to create a story that is solely focused on one character, but I don't think it can be done more than once with one singular setting, one singular plot. And even then, I don't think of myself as a capable enough writer to write something engaging. On the other hand, I have the huge advantage of the fact that the story I'm writing only for myself. The only person, the only human being that I want to please with my story is myself. So that obviously narrows down my options in a way, but it also enables me to be the only critic of the story that actually matters to me. So, yeah, again, this turned into a much longer rant than it should have, but hopefully I was able to clarify to myself what I was trying to create and what I wanted to articulate properly from the murky depths of my mind into some semi coherent actual words. I don't even know if it's worth it, but I'll hop on Asterix for just a bit, probably to finish the poisoning attempt, bringing a resolution to that, and then I'll hopefully be able to focus properly on Asterix in the next one. Last time, Asterix and Obelix figure out a way to bring back some stone, and the construction of the palace was progressing smoothly, but a ploy by their antagonist Amonphis was brewing underneath all this seeming success, and now Cleopatra accepted that fake gift coming from the Gauls, and in the next scene, our Gauls are enjoying their well deserved reward as a small banquet full of Obelix's favorite wild boars. An Egyptian patrol interrupts this dinner and brings them rather forcefully to the palace, where the queen herself reveals that their scheme failed, which obviously the Gauls are unaware of. They have no idea that any cake was sent under their name, but explaining that would be in this situation almost impossible, and after seeing the taster being poisoned, then in the prison, Asterix is heartbroken because one of the courtesans that he was having this cuckoo moment with prior to this poisoning incident was now giving him the cold shoulder, and he was trying to explain himself to his friends that there was nothing like love going on. He just wanted to explain to her that he had nothing to do with this cake incident, which both Obelix and Panoramix obviously take with a hearty amount of laugh. Meanwhile, Panoramix creates an antidote for the poisonous cake just in case, and then asks Obelix to open the door to the prison. Obelix complies and even asks the guard that is sitting in front of the door to move nicely. Unfortunately for the guard, he underestimates the capabilities of these insane Gauls, and thus fails to escape his impending doom when the doors pretty much crush him into the ground, with Obelix saying that Egyptians are mad since he asked him to move and he did not. Asterix even jumps a little bit on the door, forcing a short squeak out of the guard and a bit of waving of his hand. Next, we see Cleopatra getting her portrait done from profile, as always, and she seems to be tired of this and asks the artist if it was possible to portray her from the front, and he says modern art is not exactly my thing, and then they are interrupted by the Gauls, who dispatch of her guards and ask, quote unquote, for an audience. She is determined to then show them how a real queen dies, because she is still under the impression that their attempt at poisoning was actually orchestrated by them. Then they try to prove their innocence by claiming that the cake wasn't in fact poisoned, and then Obelix proceeds to split the cake into three parts by cutting only two, which Asterix mentions, and then Obelix proves that he did indeed split the cake into three parts by giving one to Panoramix, one to Asterix, and grabbing the entire cake that was left by himself, which Asterix comments to with a single obviously, although the only concern Asterix has is to prove his innocence to that courtesan. He finally learns her name from Cleopatra, Gimme a Kiss, an obvious play on the words. Asterix and her have this little staring contest with music and Asterix's hair being blown into by a non-existent wind, and this entire scene was seen by Amophis himself, who was spying on them through a fake pair of eyes in one of the paintings decorating the throne room, and saw the unfortunate failure of his plan. And that's where I'm going to stop for today.